The church steps were crowded that morning, sunlight falling sharp across lace and dust, as the elder sister stood draped in her wedding veil, her lips curved with pride, while whispers rippled through the town. Beside her, the younger sister lingered in the shadows, her plain dress faded from years of wear, her eyes cast low as the crowd's gaze cut sharper than knives. "That one?" a woman snickered, pointing at her. "She's no beauty. Her sister took all the looks." A man added with a cruel laugh, "No wonder no suitors claimed her. She'll wither unseen." The younger sister's hands trembled at her sides, her heart pounding as shame flushed her cheeks. The bridegroom glanced her way, smirk tugging at his lips, then turned back to the elder with a mocking lift of his chin. "Not the pretty sister," he muttered, loud enough for all to hear. The laughter that followed burned hotter than the noon sun. Elias Redfeather. I have seen how words, when spoken cruelly before many eyes, weigh heavier than chains, for chains break when struck, but shame lingers in the marrow. The younger sister took one step back, her eyes swimming, her throat tight with unshed tears. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a tall figure moved forward. His long braids tied with leather, his shoulders broad and his face solemn. The Lakota Chief's eyes fixed on her. Not her radiant sister, not the mocking crowd, but her, standing small and plain in her faded dress. The square stilled as he drew a strand of beads from his belt, their colors gleaming deep blue and red, and placed them gently into her trembling hand. Gasps rippled outward, mouths falling open as whispers surged like wildfire. "Did you see? He chose her." "A chief's beads? It's a claim." The elder sister's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her bouquet, her eyes darting between the beads and her sister's stunned face. The younger stood frozen, her breath shallow, her palm burning with the weight of what she held. She looked up at him, wide-eyed, lips parting as though to speak. But no words came. The chief only nodded once, silent, his gesture louder than 1,000 voices. The crowd erupted, outrage and disbelief spilling into shouts. "Shameful!" someone cried. "He mocks the wedding!" another yelled. The bridegroom snarled, his pride bruised, and stormed forward to tear the beads from her grasp. But the chief stepped subtly between them, his gaze unyielding, his presence immovable. And so the square hung suspended. Every face turned toward the girl once scorned as not the pretty sister, now holding beads that glimmered like fire in the sunlight, a claim that could not be undone by laughter. The murmur swelled into a storm, women clutching their shawls tighter as men shook their heads, voices rising with the heat of outrage. "She's cursed!" one hissed. "No chief has the right to mark a white bride with beads." The elder sister's veil quivered as her lips pulled tight in a bitter smile, anger flashing through the lace. "You shame me," she hissed at her younger sister, her voice loud enough for the nearest row to hear. "Do you think a string of beads makes you worthy?" The bridegroom seized on her words, laughing sharp and cruel. "Give them back before the whole town thinks this marriage is tainted." He reached for the girl's hand, but she jerked it back, clutching the beads so hard they pressed into her palm. The crowd gasped at her defiance, their eyes widening at the plain sister's trembling figure standing her ground. Elias Redfeather. A moment comes when a trembling hand holds more power than a proud man's shout, for trembling speaks of courage born in fear. The Lakota Chief stood steady, his silence a wall between her and the bridegroom's rage. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I did not ask for this." The elder's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "You should not have been seen at all. You shame our family." The townsfolk murmured agreement, their judgment spilling faster than water on stone. A woman's voice called, "Give the beads back and go hide, girl." The bridegroom stepped closer, his hand outstretched as though commanding a servant. "Return them, or I'll tear them from you myself." But the chief shifted, his frame a barrier, his deep voice finally breaking the silence. "No hand will take what was freely given." The crowd stilled, his words heavy, his eyes scanning the square until whispers faltered into unease. The younger sister stood frozen, the beads warm against her skin. Her face streaked with tears. She looked at her elder sister, so radiant, so envied, yet now twisted with fury, and felt the ground tilt beneath her. The elder lifted her veil in anger, pointing an accusing finger. "You'll ruin me. You've always ruined me." The bridegroom's jaw clenched, his pride stinging under the eyes of the crowd. He spat the words like venom. "You are nothing. No man would want you, not until now." His sneer drew laughter from the crueler throats, the sound cutting into her heart like knives. Her breath broke into sobs, the beads shaking in her grasp, her body trembling under 100 eyes. And then, unable to bear their stares, she turned and fled down the church steps, her plain dress sweeping dust as she ran, the beads clutched tight against her chest, while the chief's gaze followed her into the shadows. Dust clung to her skirts as she ran, tears blurring her vision, the laughter of the crowd chasing her down the street like a pack of wolves. She stumbled against a wagon wheel, clutching the beads tighter, the smooth surfaces digging into her palm until it hurt. Behind her, the church bells tolled, mocking her flight as if every clang declared her unworthy. She ducked into an alley, pressing her back against the rough wall, her breath ragged. Above the din, she heard her elder sister's voice ringing out sharp and triumphant. "Let her run! She's always been a shadow at my side. Now she proves it." The crowd laughed again, their cruel approval sealing the betrayal as surely as any vow. The younger sister slid to the ground, her sobs shaking her chest, her fingers curling around the beads as if they were the only proof she still existed. Elias Redfeather. Betrayal by blood cuts deeper than a stranger's jeer, for it tells the heart it was never safe, not even in the house where it was born. Footsteps echoed behind her, heavy and unhurried. She turned, startled, to see the Lakota Chief standing at the mouth of the alley, his tall frame shadowed against the sun. He had followed, silent as the wind through grass. His gaze steady on her as though the jeers of the crowd had never touched him. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her cheeks, her voice breaking. "Why did you do it? Why give me these? Now they hate me more than before." He stepped closer, the beads glinting in her fist as the light caught them. His voice was calm, deep, unshaken. "Because they see with shallow eyes. I see with truth. You carry strength, not shame." She shook her head violently, her hair falling loose, tears streaking anew. "I am nothing. They are right. My sister was always the beautiful one, the chosen one. I was never meant to stand in her shadow forever." The chief's eyes softened, but his voice carried iron. "Even shadows show the sun is near." She choked on her sob, unable to answer, her body trembling with the weight of the day. He did not press closer, only let the silence stretch until it steadied her breath. Then, turning his head toward the road beyond the alley, he spoke quietly. "Come with me, or let them break you." Her heart pounded, the beads slick in her fist, her mind torn between the safety of running and the danger of being seen. The memory of her sister's sneer burned in her ears, and slowly, trembling, she lifted her eyes to the man who had claimed her with beads before them all. The road stretched long and empty as the chief led her from town, his horse's hooves steady while she stumbled on foot behind. The beads clutched so tightly her knuckles whitened. The jeers still echoed in her ears, sharper than the stones the children had hurled when she passed their laughter. By the time dusk lowered its veil, they reached the edge of the rancher's land, a cabin weathered but solid, its porch leaning like a tired sentinel against the prairie wind. The chief dismounted, tying his reins with calm precision, then motioned for her to step inside. She hesitated, glancing back at the path to town, its lights distant but cruel, and whispered, "If I leave, they'll call me a coward. If I stay, they'll tear me apart." Elias Redfeather. A woman's choice on the frontier was rarely her own. It was torn from her by husbands, by fathers, by crowds that saw her as less than whole. Yet sometimes, a single step chosen for herself could shake a town to its roots. She stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath her weight, and entered the cabin. The room smelled faintly of smoke and leather, a hearth cold but ready, blankets folded neatly on a chair. The chief lit a lantern, its glow chasing back shadows, and nodded for her to sit. She lowered herself to the chair, the beads spilling from her hand onto her lap, their colors glinting faintly. Her fingers traced them as though trying to stitch her heart back together. "They'll come for me," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "They'll say I stole your gift. They'll say I lured you." He crouched beside her, his gaze unwavering. "They will say many things. Words are weak. What matters is what you choose to believe." She shivered, drawing the beads to her chest. "I want to believe I am more than what they said, but I've heard it my whole life. Plain, unwanted, not the pretty sister." Her voice broke, and tears welled again. The chief reached out, not touching her but close enough for her to feel his steadiness. "Pretty fades, strength does not. They mock because they fear what they do not understand." The words settled over her like a blanket, and for a moment she breathed without trembling. But then, outside, a stone struck the window with a sharp crack. She flinched, clutching the beads. Voices rose in the night, cruel and jeering. "Bring her out! Let her face the town!" Another stone shattered glass, shards raining across the floor. She gasped, the beads slipping from her hand, scattering like tears across the boards. The chief rose slowly, his shoulders filling the room as he stepped toward the door. "Stay here," he said, his voice low as thunder, while outside the mob pressed closer, hungry to strip her of the little dignity she still clung to. The cabin door shuddered under a heavy fist, the wood groaning as voices outside rose into a fevered chant. "Bring her out! Let the plain sister show her shame!" The girl huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself, shards of glass glittering at her feet, the beads scattered like spilled blood across the floor. Each jeer cut deeper than any lash, and she pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound still crawled inside, insidious and merciless. Elias Redfeather. A mob has no eyes, only mouths, and mouths once opened feed on cruelty until nothing but silence can starve them. The door creaked open, not from the mob's push, but from within, as the chief stepped out into the night, the lantern glow stretching his shadow long against the dirt. The crowd fell into uneasy silence as he closed the door firmly behind him, his stance broad, his braids catching the torchlight like lines of steel. The rival farmer who had once courted the elder sister sneered, stepping forward with arrogance thick in his stride. "What claim have you to meddle in white men's weddings? Give her up. She's nothing. A blemish on her own bloodline." The crowd roared in approval, their voices once again rising, feeding on his cruelty. But the chief raised his hand, palm outward, and the roar faltered. His voice came low, steady, carrying with it the weight of a mountain. "You call her nothing because you see with shallow eyes. I see a spirit that does not break, though you press her down again and again." The rival laughed bitterly. "Spirit doesn't bear children. Spirit doesn't bring dowry. She is barren of worth." The words struck like a blade, and the girl inside flinched though no one touched her. But the chief did not waver. He stepped forward, his voice rising so all could hear. "Your worth is not in womb or coin. Your worth is in the courage to stand when mocked, to endure when betrayed. She holds that worth in her hand, and no jeer can strip it from her." Gasps rippled through the crowd, some lowering their eyes, their torches flickering with the unease of truth spoken aloud. The rival's face darkened, his pride stung, and he spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this, Chief. At dawn the sheriff will have her dragged into the square, and then let's see whose words weigh more." He turned, mounting his horse with a jerk, and the mob followed, their chant fading into the night, though their malice lingered heavy in the air. Inside the cabin, the girl slowly lifted the beads from the floor, her hands trembling. She whispered into the silence, "Why me?" But no answer came, save the chief's shadow filling the doorway, a silent vow that the dawn would not find her alone. The cabin sank into silence once the mob's torches faded beyond the ridge, yet the girl's heart would not still. She sat hunched by the cold hearth, clutching the beads to her chest, their colors dulled by the dim lantern glow. Every whisper of the wind outside became the echo of laughter, every creak of the boards another jeer from the square. Her sister's words repeated in her mind, plain, unwanted, not the pretty one, until she pressed her palms over her ears to shut them out. But memories are louder than crowds, and they would not be silenced. She rose restlessly and slipped into the church nearby, its door yawning wide like a mouth that swallowed secrets. The pews were empty, the altar bare, the air heavy with dust and sorrow. She knelt before the cross, the beads tangled in her fingers, and bowed her head. "Mama," she whispered, voice breaking, "you gave these to me so I would not be forgotten, but they don't see me. They never did. Maybe you gave them to the wrong daughter." Her tears splashed against the wooden rail, and she bit her lip until the copper taste filled her mouth. Elias Redfeather. When a woman prays at midnight, her words rise not to be answered, but to be carried, proof that even in silence, her soul refused to bow. The beads slipped through her fingers, clicking softly against the floor like a broken rosary. She scrambled to gather them again, her voice trembling. "How can I carry life when they curse me empty? How can I be more than nothing when even my blood mocks me?" The lantern flame flickered low, shadows stretching long across the church walls, and for a moment she thought she was utterly alone. But then the heavy door creaked, a shaft of moonlight spilling across the worn boards. She turned, startled, and saw the chief standing there, framed by the pale light, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He did not speak at first, only watched as she clutched the beads to her chest as though they were her very heart. Slowly, he stepped forward, his moccasins soundless on the wood, and lowered a folded blanket beside her knees. His voice, when it came, was quiet but unyielding. "You are not nothing. You are not empty. These beads do not lie." She bowed her head again, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, her body trembling as the warmth of the blanket settled around her shoulders. And for the first time that day, the jeers seemed to soften, pushed back by the quiet strength of a man who asked nothing of her but to believe she was more than the world allowed. Dawn found the girl wrapped in the blanket, her eyes heavy from a night of tears, the beads still pressed in her hand. The chief guided her from the church, his stride steady, his silence carrying more promise than words. They rode together beyond the town's edge, past the cottonwoods, and into the wide sweep of prairie where smoke curled from the Lakota campfires. Women paused in their work as the two approached, their gazes curious but not unkind. The girl's heart thudded, shame pulling her chin down, but the chief gestured for her to dismount. A woman with silver streaks in her braids stepped forward, her lined face softened by wisdom. She took the girl's hand gently, studying the beads clenched in her palm, and smiled. These are not trinkets, they are stories. Each color carries a life, a prayer, a promise. The girl's throat tightened. They mocked me for them, said they proved nothing. The women around her murmured, some shaking their heads, others laying gentle hands on her shoulders. The elder spoke again. They prove you are seen, that you belong. No crowd can strip that. Elias Redfeather. The Lakota wove beads not merely as ornament, but as testimony. To wear them was to carry voices older than one's own, to walk with ancestors beside you. Tears welled in the girl's eyes as another woman stepped forward, her fingers deft as she braided the beads into the younger sister's hair. Now the stories are carried with you, she said softly. The girl's chest swelled with a strange mixture of sorrow and hope. Her reflection caught in a polished bowl of water, showing her face not plain but adorned, her worth glimmering in the colors woven through her dark strands. For the first time, she dared to smile, though it trembled on her lips. The women circled her, humming low, their voices weaving around her like the beads in her hair, a song of dignity she had never known. She clutched the chief's blanket tighter, the weight of belonging settling into her bones. But the fragile peace shattered with the distant thunder of hooves. She turned sharply, her breath hitching, as riders appeared on the horizon, torches in their hands, anger driving their pace. The rival farmer's voice carried even before he reached the camp, full of venom and scorn. You thought you could hide her here? She belongs to the town, not to you savages. The women's humming stilled, their hands tightening on the girl's arms as she froze, the beads heavy against her hair. The chief stepped forward, broad shoulders squaring, his voice low but sharp as flint. She belongs to no man's mockery, and today you will learn it. The riders fanned out at the edge of the Lakota camp, their torches flaring against the morning sky, smoke curling upward as the rival farmer shouted from his saddle. Hand her over! She's a stain on our town and a curse on her sister's wedding. You think beads make her worth something? They don't. She is nothing, and we'll prove it before every eye in the square. The girl clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her fingers brushing the beads braided into her hair. Her heart hammered so loud she could hear nothing else, her knees trembling under the weight of 100 eyes, those who mocked, those who waited, and those who silently prayed she would not fall. The Lakota women stepped closer, circling her, their faces calm but firm, as though their very presence wove a shield around her fragile frame. Elias Redfeather. When truth is tested, it is not only the heart that must stand, but the voices that rise around it, each one binding the weak until they can no longer be broken. The sheriff rode forward then, his badge glinting in the rising light, his pistol resting easy on his thigh. His eyes were cold, his voice flat. Enough ceremony, she comes with us. She has no claim, no papers, no right to stay here. She will answer before the town at dusk. The rival farmer smirked, urging his horse a step closer. And then we'll all see what she's really worth, spoiled beads and all. The girl's hands shook, but she stepped forward, her voice breaking yet loud enough to reach them. You say I am nothing because I am not beautiful like my sister, because I have no dowry, no ring, no husband to make me matter. But you are wrong. I may be plain to your eyes, but I am not worthless. The rival laughed, cruel and cutting. Words won't save you, girl. The sheriff shifted, his hand brushing the butt of his pistol. Stand down, or I'll take you by force. The camp tensed, silence stretching taut as bowstring. The girl's breath hitched, but the beads at her temple caught the sun, glimmering like sparks of defiance. She straightened her back, her voice trembling but sure. These beads are not just decoration. They are proof that I belong, that someone saw me and did not turn away. The rival's face twisted in scorn. He raised his hand to signal his men forward. But before they could move, the chief stepped in front of her, his broad chest shielding her from their view. His voice was low, sharp as steel. If you take one step closer, you will have to pass through me. And the crowd gasped, for in that moment, death itself seemed to bow its head to the weight of his vow. The air grew taut as bowstring, every rider frozen as the chief spread his arms wide before the girl, his shadow falling across her trembling frame. The sheriff's fingers lingered near his pistol, but his eyes flicked nervously across the camp, reading the stillness of the Lakota warriors gathering quietly behind their leader. The rival farmer snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "She's nothing. Step aside, Chief, before you bring war over a worthless girl." The crowd of townsmen muttered uneasily, their bravado thinning as the silence deepened. The girl clutched the beads braided into her hair, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet rooted into the earth, as though the very soil beneath the camp claimed her. Elias Redfeather. There are moments when the world itself holds its breath, when cruelty and courage clash not with bullets, but with the weight of what a man dares to shield. The chief's voice carried like thunder, steady and commanding. "You see her as plain, as nothing. I see her spirit, strong as stone, fierce as the prairie fire. She is worth more than your barns, your fences, your shallow pride. And if one of you wishes to strip her of that worth, then you must strike me first." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some men lowered their eyes, others shifted uneasily in their saddles. The sheriff's hand trembled on his revolver, sweat glistening on his brow. The rival farmer, red with fury, spat into the dirt. "You shame us all for her." He spurred his horse forward, but before his mount could lunge, the sheriff barked, "Hold!" The command cracked like a whip, halting the rival in mid-charge. The sheriff's pistol hovered, raised toward the chief, but the weight of every watching eye pressed heavy on his trigger finger. At last, his arm sagged, the barrel lowering. "This isn't law," he muttered, "but neither is burning a woman for being plain." Shame colored his voice, thin but enough. The rival cursed, pulling his horse back, his men wavering behind him, their torches sputtering in the morning wind. The chief turned, unhurried, his face calm. He reached into his pouch, drew another string of beads, and draped them into the girl's open palms before all the town and tribe to see. "These are not trinkets, they are witness. You are not forgotten, you are chosen." The girl's knees buckled, tears spilling as she clutched the beads, her body shaking with disbelief. The crowd, silenced, could only watch as the chief's vow became her shield. And in that breathless square of prairie, mercy bent cruelty to its knees. The rival farmer reeled in his saddle, his face twisted with rage, but no voice rose to join him. The torches sputtered in the wind, their smoke rising like the last gasp of a fight already lost. One by one, the townsmen turned their horses away, muttering beneath their breath, unwilling to meet the chief's steady gaze. The sheriff lingered longest, his badge catching the light as though weighed down by its own shame, before he holstered his pistol and followed the others back toward town. Silence fell heavy across the camp, broken only by the soft crackle of dying flames. The girl stood trembling, the beads heavy in her hands. Her hair still adorned with the strand braided by the Lakota women. For the first time, she did not clutch them as a shield, but held them as though they were a crown. Elias Redfeather. Dignity once given cannot be stripped, for it takes root deeper than scorn, deeper than shame. It blooms even in the most barren soil, fed by the simple truth of being seen. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the earth, her tears falling freely, not of shame now, but of release. The chief knelt before her, his eyes steady, his hands lifting hers so the beads glimmered in the rising sun. "You are not the shadow of a sister," he said quietly. "You are light enough for yourself?" The words struck her deeper than any vow she had heard spoken at an altar, and her heart swelled with a warmth she had never known. She looked up at him, lips trembling, and whispered, "Why me? Why would you choose me?" His gaze softened, and he answered simply, "Because you are strong enough to be mocked and still stand." Around them, the Lakota women hummed low, a song of affirmation, their voices weaving a mantle around her shoulders. The girl rose slowly, the blanket slipping from her back as she stepped forward, her posture no longer bowed. She walked through the camp, beads gleaming. And though the riders had gone, it felt as though the whole world watched her take those steps without flinching. In town, they would still whisper, still judge, but whispers could not undo what had been done. She had been claimed, not as property, not as shame, but as dignity made flesh. The chief walked beside her, silent but unwavering, and that silence spoke louder than vows or rings. And so the tale settled into the prairie wind, a story carried beyond fire and mockery. I am Elias Redfeather, and I tell it as it was, that a woman once mocked as not the pretty sister walked with beads in her hand, and from that day forward, no man's laughter could diminish her worth. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had been standing in that crowd, would you have joined in the mockery or stood silent with the chief? Tell us in the comments.